Ali Braithwaite Condie is the author of the #1 New York Times bestselling Matched series and the Edgar Award finalist Summer Lost, among other novels, and of several picture books, including Here. A former English teacher, Ali resides outside of Salt Lake City with her family, including her 4 children. She has an MFA from the Vermont College of Fine Arts and is the founder and director of the nonprofit Right Out Foundation. Of her novel, The Only Girl in Town, Robert Benway wrote, "An eerily beautiful and lyrical story of loss, grief, and how quickly relationships can change while also changing us." Of her forthcoming novel, The Unwedding, Brad Meltzer says, "Dead bodies, brutal secrets, and a fabulous view, The Unwedding is proof that Ali Condie knows exactly what we love and what we fear. Come take a wonderful roller coaster of a trip, but don't expect much sleep." On a personal note, my favorite work of Condie's is her middle grade novel Summer Lost, in which she explores grief through the lens of a 12-year-old protagonist, Cedar. I love how strange little objects and sherbet ice cream remind Cedar of her deceased brother, and how working at the Summer Lost Theater Festival helps Cedar feel close to her deceased father. I love how messy Cedar's grief is. Some moments she thinks about her family all the time, while in others she doesn't remember them at all, and this weighs on her. Condie delivers Cedar's narrative through lyrical yet relatable prose that wholly captured my heart. Summer Lost holds a place on my greatest of all time shelf. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ali Condie to BYU's English Reading Series.
Thank you so much. That was the most wonderful introduction. Thank you. That was, I can tell time and care was taken about with that, and I'm really honored that you would say that about my book, so thank you so much for that. I can think of no worse punishment for myself or for anyone else than to hear me read from my own work for 40 minutes. I mean, I'm proud of my work. I'm glad it exists. I've worked really, really hard on it, but it's just, like, I don't love hearing myself talk, which I'm about to do for 50 minutes. I apologize. But I do feel like it's a little more helpful if I can show you some pictures of things and talk about some things other than my work, in addition to reading from the books. That said, I am really excited because today I'll be reading from 2 novels that are my most recent novels. The Only Girl in Town just came out in September, and The Unwedding will be released on June 4th, and it will be the second. I just read at a librarian conference yesterday in Ohio. It's only the second time I'll be able to read from The Unwedding, and that is always really fun. People like to ask, what's your favorite book that you've written? And I say, well, it's like my kids. I love them all, but the most recent ones haven't misbehaved for long enough yet. So I like to read from the new stuff because I haven't seen their shtick before quite as much as the other ones. Just by way of introduction, in addition to that beautiful introduction, I am a BYU graduate. I got a degree in English teaching a long, long time ago. I taught high school at Provo and Timpview High, and then I moved to New York where I taught for a little while, and then returned back here in 2008. So most of my life I've lived in Utah or studied in Utah. I grew up in Cedar City. I do have a degree from the Vermont College of Fine Arts, which is my master's degree, and I did live in New York for 5 years, but I love Utah. It informs all of my writing, but neither of these books are set in Utah, which was also sort of fun. It's fun to love where you live, and it's fun to go new places too. So I'm just going to kind of talk to you a little bit about how I came to write these books so that when I read from them, you will have context, and maybe you will feel very, very thrilled that I'm reading to you from my own published work. I'm sorry, I keep joking about that, but there is something after you've written it, sharing it with the world, if you're not a performer, that feels a little vulnerable and scary. And so I'm very grateful to be with a safe and lovely audience today. I'm also very excited because I'll be teaching a creative writing course at BYU this fall. It's something I've looked forward to and wanted to do for a long time, and I'm grateful because there are a lot of fantastic teachers at this university, as you know, and some of them are seated in the audience and some of them are my dearest friends. So I'm really honored to be here today. So, if you've read any of my books, you've probably read this series. This was the series that was on the New York Times list for a year. I just received my favorite series of text messages ever, probably from Penny Ellis, who is in the audience, who read the book recently, and I felt like I was kind of rediscovering it from her point of view. It's been a minute since I've read those books, and she was asking me the greatest questions. But that is a series that has opened a lot of doors for me, and it was released in 2010, 2011, and 2012. I also wrote a science fiction novel called Atlantia that was released shortly after those. Summer Lost, which was spoken about so kindly, was a finalist for the Best Juvenile Mystery in the year in which it was published. The Last Voyage of Poe Blythe is a revenge novel that came out a couple of years ago, and it is a companion novel to the Matched trilogy, not a straight-up sequel, but it is set in the same world. My first picture book came out in May. It's called Here. They subtitled it for Amazon search engines. Here's a little bit of information, insider information. I despise that it says here, I can be mindful, but we have to do what Amazon wants, which is have keywords in our titles that are easily searchable. Because I feel like that makes it a little more like, I don't know what, like didactic than I wanted the story to be. Don't tweet that. My publisher does a great job, and we were all laughing that we had to do this, but it is what it is. And Jamie Kim is a fabulous illustrator, just beautiful work. And so I'm really honored that her artwork is part of this story. And I wrote this book for a child of mine who was struggling with anxiety during the pandemic, and that was really, I was also struggling with some anxiety during the pandemic. I don't know if anyone else felt that way, and that was a really grounding and great experience. There's a sequel that will be out next summer. Jamie's also doing the art for that, called There, and that's about depression. But they're not about anxiety or depression. It's not like this little character's like, I sure feel anxiety today. It's about just a little person kind of moving through that with a person that they love. And those have been really fun. I have a third picture book coming out the year after that, so 2026, with Dan Santat. He's a longtime friend of mine, and he just won the National Book Award for his book, A First Time for Everything. He's also won the Caldecott for Beagle, which is a really charming picture book. And that one's called Ghostwriter. It's about a ghost and a kid who leave notes for each other because they both don't think the other is real. And I can't wait to see what Dan does with that, because he has a particularly naughty and excellent sense of humor. So his art is very lively and reflects that. And then this is the novel that just came out in September. This is called The Only Girl in Town. And I started writing this in 2016 as part of my MFA project. So I went back to get my MFA after most of my books were already published. And I did that because while I had the vocabulary of an English teacher who taught high school, and while I knew how to write, I did not know how to teach writing. I didn't have the vocabulary yet to teach other people about writing in a process that wasn't my own. Does that make sense? Like, I could tell you about my process, but I wasn't Andy Ellis yet. I didn't know how to teach people how to write. She's going to be so mad this whole presentation, because I'm going to talk to her, but she's one of the finest teachers and writers I know, and you very rarely get one of those things, and to have both is exceptional. And so I knew that I was lacking, and that's why I went back to get a master's degree. So I started writing this book, and I could get, and are there any fellow writers in here? I could get about 50, 100 pages in, and then every stinking time I hit the wall. Like, I'd get to that point, and I was like, there is more to this story. There is something else here. I feel strongly about it, but it is not working. And so that was really, really frustrating, and I put it aside, and I wrote some other things, and then I came back to it. And from the very beginning, I knew that it was about a girl who is in a town and everybody else disappears. She's the only one left. And I thought, okay, what can I do to make this interesting? What can I do to make this not just this girl like walking around being boring? Because there's no other characters to bounce off of. There's nothing else happening. And a story that came to me really quickly was a short story called There Will Come Soft Rains by Ray Bradbury that I had taught when I taught 10th grade English at Timpview. And kind of the beauty and the pain of teaching high school is you will teach something that you love, and then you will teach it 6 times during a day, so you get to know it pretty intimately. And no matter how many times I taught There Will Come Soft Rains, I looked forward to reading that with the students. It was fresh, it was interesting, it kind of got me every time. And so that was pretty deep in my brain. And I was thinking, oh, what can I do? And then I remembered the short story, and I thought, that was a master class in making you care about people who are not there. So in this short story, it takes place, as does much of Bradbury's work, in the future, and the nuclear holocaust has taken place, so everybody is dead. No one is left. But it's in the future, so there's a self-cleaning house, and it goes on cleaning and cleaning and cleaning itself. That's the story. And somehow he makes it so interesting. Somehow there are characters that are coming to life in your head, even though they're not necessarily on the page. And I thought, all right, I want this to kind of have the feel of Bradbury. It's not necessarily science fiction. I would categorize it as kind of slipstream fiction, where it's contemporary, but one thing is off. Does that sort of make sense to you? So in this case, the one thing that's off is that everybody is gone. And there's a line that stood out to me a lot as I was thinking about this and as I reread Bradbury, that says, the entire west face of the house was black, save for 5 places. And those 5 spots are the 5 spots where the people and their ball were incinerated. Like, that was the moment of death. But their bodies blocked the wall, so it's not ash and everything right there. And that is such a powerful image. And I've thought of that. It's kind of haunted me through the years. Like, it's really heartbreaking, right? Like, that's what they were doing. I guess we're still having to mow our lawns in the future, I think is what's happening. I feel like that could have been taken care of by science, but whatever. And so that was the thing I kept thinking about is, all right, how can I have these characters still sort of show up even though they're gone? And the answer to that was flashbacks, as is often the answer to many questions in fiction. But the story, There Will Come Soft Rains, it was based on a poem called There Will Come Soft Rains that was published decades earlier by a poet named Sarah Teasdale. And in the story by Bradbury, this poem comes on over the loudspeaker in the house. Like, they listened to poetry every day, and this is the poem that ends up being selected. And it's really beautiful. I'm going to read it to you because I do like reading other people's work. And it says, it starts out very pretty and lovely and sweet, and then it gets dark, which I like. I like bittersweet things. I like a little bit of that in my poetry and my writing. I don't love it so much in my life. I wish it were all cheerful. But this is the poem. There will come soft rains and the smell of the ground, and swallows circling with their shimmering sound, and frogs in the pools singing at night, and wild plum trees in tremulous white. Robins will wear their feathery fire, whistling their whims on a low fence wire, and not one will know of the war, not one will care at last when it is done. Not one would mind neither bird nor tree if mankind perished utterly, and spring herself, when she woke at dawn, would scarcely know that we were gone. And so you can see where Bradbury maybe got the influence, right, from this poem. Okay, everything's pretty, everything's beautiful. Oh my word, everyone's dead. Everyone's gone, but things are carrying on is kind of the feeling. And that was what I ended up deciding to put into this book. Everyone's gone, she's carrying on. How long can she do it? And what is she responsible for? Because you also get the sense in this poem and in Bradbury's story, like, we did this to ourselves, right? We weren't responsible citizens. We didn't take care of the earth. We didn't look out for each other. We got too excited about blowing each other up or technology or lots of different things, and now we're gone and it doesn't matter. And I find that both really disturbing and really wonderful. Like, that when mankind inevitably does perish, inevitably again, and is gone, the world will continue. The world will be okay, even after what we've done to it. So that sounds kind of grim, but I do write for young adults, and I do believe in hope, and there is a lot of hope in this story as well. When I was growing up, I lived in Cedar City, which is a fantastic little town, and back then, we could go to the national parks, and we could go to all those beautiful places like Canara Falls with no permit, with no purse or script, with no thought for the morrow. We just wandered over and jumped off cliffs and did whatever. And it was a great way to grow up. And as I was writing this story about the only girl in town whose name is, why am I forgetting the character's name? You'll see, she's coming along. But her name's July, and she realizes that everyone's gone and she might be responsible. And one of the places that she goes to where she realizes something bad might have happened is called the Jump. And the Jump is a place where they are runners, she's a runner, they would go running and then after they finished their route, they would jump into this place. Well, so I didn't use, for once in my life, I do return to southern Utah a lot. I used a different place. I used Ithaca, New York, which is where my then husband went to graduate school and where I lived for 5 years. And I was young then. I thought I was old, but I was young. It was the years of 22 to 27, and I fell in with a tough crowd of fellow LDS young mothers who were putting their husbands through graduate school, who went running in the mornings because that was the only time in the day that we had to go, because our spouses were going to graduate school and teaching, and they were very busy, and we all lived hilariously in sororities. We were the house parents in sororities. So in Ithaca, there was a rule on the books that all those women living alone constituted a brothel. In sororities, it's very old, a very old rule. So an adult had to live on campus with them, and the faculty, or the sorority, the Greek system, got wise to the fact that if you only advertised within the LDS branch listserv, you got young couples who really, really wanted to save money, had some cute kids, did not sleep around or mess with the girls, and it was a great scenario for everyone. So they only advertised on the listserv. And so I think 9 of the initially, sometimes they had to go wider, so 9 of the 13 sororities had Mormon house parents, LDS house parents, and we lived there, and we lived right on campus. So we would meet, we would go running, we would get home in time for the husbands to go to work. This is 20 years ago. It probably sounds a little archaic now, but that was the way it was. And these women were and are, I'm still friends with them, phenomenal. Some of the smartest, most interesting, coolest women I've ever met. And so we would go running together, and at the end we would jump into this spillway. That was another jump. And so as I was writing this book, I ended up setting it in Ithaca, and I thought, they're going to jump they're going to go to the jump the way we did. And one day we were jumping, and we all have little kids and babies, remember? And one day we were like, oh no. Maybe what we're doing is a little bit dangerous. This is not the same cross we found. This is a different one. I went back and took a few pictures to remind myself of the book. But yeah, people have died at the jump, and that put a whole new spin on what we were doing. We continued to jump. This is maybe not the greatest idea, but we did. Mindy Morris, who is the spouse of Shad Morris, if anyone knows him, the business department, was always the bravest, and she was always happy to go make sure the water was deep enough. And so that kind of leads me to, this is a lyric from our poet laureate of the United States right now, Taylor Swift. And there's a really great line in one of her songs that says, I can go anywhere I want, just not home. And I find that line so, so haunting. So I couldn't finish this book. I was stuck. And then in 2019, in September, I got divorced. And in 2020 of March, a little thing happened called the COVID-19 pandemic. And I had bills to pay. I'd been the main breadwinner for my family for the last 10 years, and that had not changed. And I was like, I have to write something. I have to turn something in, or we are in real trouble here. And I went back to all my old manuscripts, because I was anyone else in a particularly not generative place in March of 2020? I was like, surely there's something here that's salvageable, because I don't have, our kids were all home, and we were doing all these things, and I don't know how teachers did it. I have no idea. Teachers with kids at home, because they were teaching and parenting, and I don't know how healthcare workers did it. All I had to do was write a stinking book, and I could not do it. And so I went back and I found this book, and I got there and I was reading it, and I thought, oh shoot, I think this is the book I have to write, because I know the story now. Because back then I just was pretending that I was writing from the point of view of someone who was very, very lonely. And in March 2020, I was someone who was very, very lonely. For the first time since I was 21, I no longer had a spouse. For the first time since I was 24, my children were not with me all the time. They went to their dads sometimes. And so I would wake up and I was like, nobody is here. And remember when we couldn't see friends or family, or like literally nobody was there. And so I thought, oh shoot, I can go anywhere I want, just not home. I think I have the emotional arc for this book. So I'm going to read to you from the beginning of the story. All you really need to know is that the main character is named July. She is 17. I guess you wouldn't even know that going into the book. But one of the things we did was, and this is the power of a good editor, if any of you are writers, I had chapters called Once and then, and those were the chapters where she's alone, she's figuring out, and then are the flashback. And my editor said, why don't we change it to now and once? And that changed everything. That changed the whole feel of the book, that small change. So the chapters will be now and once. They're very short, so I'm just going to read you 7 chapters, which is 7 pages. Some of the chapters get longer as we go on, but you can go home and feel like I read 7 chapters today. I'm in great shape. So chapter 1, now. I'm walking back from the water when it happens. I am looking down at my hands in the late summer sun. It is the time of day when afternoon slides into dusk. I am looking at them, thinking these are my hands. That is so strange. My hands are my hands, like in kindergarten when you have to practice writing your name over and over again until it looks so weird. You start to wonder, is this really my name? This can't be my name. Like a straggle of string unraveled from a sweater, a trail made by a snake in the mud. I am thinking that, and then I feel the world empty around me. Cicadas stop screaming. Cars stop humming along the road past the edge of the wood. My phone, which had been buzzing in my pocket, goes silent. When I pull it out, it's cold and dead. When I turn it on, there is no signal. In the distance, the water splashes over the spillway, but no one calls or cries out. I know before I know that everyone is gone. Chapter 2, now. Just your mind, my brain says, just your mind playing tricks on you. Everyone's not gone, the world's not empty. That's impossible. Get in the car, go home, everything will be fine. I've made it through the woods and I am standing where we leave our cars when we go to the jump. Parked under a heavy branched tree is my beat up old Subaru, silver. Long scratch on the driver's side door and an old peeling Keep Lithia green bumper sticker on the back. But there is no sense of coming and leaving, no engines turning on or off, no crunch of footsteps in the gravel of the parking area, no people calling out to one another in greeting or farewell. I unlock the car and get in and lock it. The car is hot and muggy inside, an empty Gatorade bottle rattling around in the front seat where Sam or Sydney or Alex or Ella or Jack used to sit. I hear my friends laughing. I see Sam turn his head to look at me, the lights from the dashboard illuminating his face. The air rushes in through the windows and it smells of summer rain. I turn away from the memories and put my hands on the steering wheel, then my forehead against it. Breathe, I say, just your mind. Chapter 3, now. I send a message to everyone in my contacts. The message says, hello? I wait. Nothing. No one writes back. Chapter 4, now. Not a single other car on the road. No one out with their dog, walking across the yard with a plate of cookies for their neighbor, pushing a lawnmower into the garage, talking at the mailbox, the curb, the little park at the end of the road. No kids playing in the yard or runners on the street or teenagers walking together in knots along the sidewalks. Not a soul along the wide grassy areas by the college dorms. Chapter 5, now. I drive slowly down the street. There is no screen blue light seeping through windows, nobody playing in their yards, no snick hiss of backyard sprinklers, no smell of burgers grilled for dinner on the air. I get out of the car and go up the sidewalk to my house. My heart tick-tocks with hope. Someone has to be there. They can't all be gone. And then this is a chapter that has no label, no once, no now. It's a label that is out of time, is what we call it. It has no label. And it says, therapist, you should make a list. July of what? Therapist, of ways to calm yourself, to settle the weather pattern in your head. July, I don't. July. Therapist, you don't what? July, see how that's going to help. Therapist, you don't have to do it now. That can be your homework, okay? Bring it with you next time. So that's the beginning of The Only Girl in Town. And now I'm going to segue into talking about the unwedding a little bit, which is really, really fun for me. I have grown up always reading adult murder mysteries, wishing I could write one, thinking I'll never be good enough to do it. And I don't know if I am, but I have done it. So that's pretty fun. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. I'll read a teeny bit from that, and then we will have some Q&A if that's all right. So I was really lucky because I grew up with a mom who was a fantastic full-time mother, as much as she could be, all during the summers, and then she also was a professor of art at SUU and does a lot of gorgeous artwork. This is her in her office for a feature that was done in a newspaper a few years ago, And this was my first. I am a garbage artist, but this was my first seeing someone who was a mom, and I grew up with it, who also managed to create. And the reason she paints in pastels, which is like chalk instead of oil, which was her initial medium, is me and her other children. But I'm her oldest, and one time she came in and she had been doing a beautiful portrait in oils, and I thought the doll looked, it was of a doll that someone had during the influenza epidemic, and it was the child passed away, but the doll survived. And so she'd arranged this like gorgeous still life of this China doll with some other broken things. I mean, it was exquisite. And I was 2 or 3, and I thought the doll looked sad, and I drew a red smiley face on it with paint. And so my mom laughs about that story. She tells it really well. And then she says, but that was the moment I decided I didn't want to lock my studio. I didn't want my kids to feel like they couldn't see what I was doing. And so I switched to pastels because pastels are easier to fix. And she has stuck with that ever since because she had 4 more children. So I think about that a lot, especially as I was writing this book, which is called The Unwedding. Like, what did my parents give me? Because The Unwedding is a lot about someone going through something and having to harken back to those beginning things. Also in The Unwedding, I went to the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden for work. I've been to Minneapolis a few times for work, and I always find my way there. And I wanted to put art in the book, kind of as a tribute to my mom, but also because I feel like it influences us so much. And so in the Unwedding, it's a locked room mystery. It's actually a locked resort mystery, which means people are trapped, nobody can leave. But I didn't want it to be, again, like The Only Girl in Town, like this finite place in some senses. And so I added a sculpture garden to the resort. So I feel like art can always launch you somewhere else, even if you're trapped in one place. And so there's a sculpture garden there. Oh, this is one of my mom's paintings. She's so good with light and color and art. And I thought about that a lot as well, because one of the things my parents did beautifully, they did a lot of things beautifully, was they took us to the national parks and to pretty places where kind of humanity butts up against the natural world and we don't always win. And that's what happens in The Unwedding. So it's set in Big Sur, California, and there are constantly landslides there. It is at the edge of the world. It's so gorgeous. But there's a landslide, and the resort, everyone at the resort is trapped, and that happens. Not regularly, but every few years. So I wanted to put that in as well. And then I think writing The Unwedding also came because of reading experiences. So my dad is a really, really fun traveler. Back in the day before GPS or anything like that, he just would make you an itinerary and you received it on the airplane, and he hummed Mission Impossible as he gave it to you. Or if you were going on a long car ride, that was when he gave it to you, and it had where we would do laundry on the trip. It had everything planned out. And he took my sister and I to England when I was 12, and it kind of blew our minds. Like, we'd never been anywhere like that before. So this is my sister and I and my cute dad at Hampton Court. And he also believed that you should read what you're experiencing. And so he decided that for us, he would get us a book that was set in England. This is us at the Bodleian Library. I included this entirely because of his pants, which are excellent. I feel like they are coming back in style, and I just want to give props to my father for being so timeless. He bought me the one on the left, Agatha Christie, 5 complete novels of murder and detection, and my sister the one on the right, 5 complete Miss Marple novels, and we read those the whole trip. And I try to do that for my kids. Sometimes they refuse to read, but there is something about reading a book set where you are while you're there that just is like, for me at least, it's like the synthesis of all awesomeness. Like, it was so fun. And so we read these, we passed these back and forth for years. We both still have them. I've probably read each of these 20, 30 times, and I'm not kidding, because the setting was so great. What Agatha Christie also does so well is dialogue. I mean, some of it's 100 years old, and it is so sharp. Her characters are so well drawn. And so all of this was going on. I'm reading mysteries my whole life. I never think I'll write one because I have a very blunt and excellent agent who's like, I don't think you can write adult. She's like, I just don't know that you can do it. And so, and she's great. She's never steered me wrong, but I started writing a murder mystery, and I sent it to her and I said, it's fine if you say I can't do it. We've always been able to like keep me as a working author, which is pretty insane in this day and age, this long. And she's like, I love it. I think you should write this. And I was floored. But that was exciting for me. So what happened was, I was writing and I ran into another tough spot where I was like, I don't know, I love writing for kids, but I'm just kind of burned out. I don't know if I have another young adult novel in me right now after The Only Girl in Town. That took a lot out of me. But we still have to do this. I still have to pay the bills. And I thought, I'm just going to write something fun and see what happens. So this came about because, like I mentioned earlier, I had just been divorced. We'd been married for 20 years, or almost. Someone else was taken on the 20th anniversary trip that we were supposed to go on instead of me. And I was bummed. And I thought, okay, I can do this. I'm fine. I'm an adult. I have coherent thoughts. I can travel by myself. And so I did that, and I hated it. And I don't know if this says I'm just half a person or whatever. I've traveled for years for work by myself. But there was something about, I went to a really cool place, being there alone and not having anyone to share it with, that I hated. And not only did I not have my spouse, I also didn't have my kids. So I was sitting there and I was like, this is brutal. Like, I'm just, this is fine. I'm eating dinner. It's great, no problem. You know, looking at my phone, do I bring a book to dinner? What do I do? But I did the thing that we all do when we are authors or when we're alone and we're used to not being alone, which is just eavesdrop the hell out of that situation. So I started I'm so sad. And then I was like, what are they saying? And I'm also really raw, right? Because my ex has taken his new girlfriend on the trip that was supposed to be ours. And so I'm paying attention to everyone else's marriages and reactions. I'm like, well, their marriage seems, I don't know, they're going to make it. And then, oh man, they seem really happy. And then, couple walking in that's older and they're like, we're celebrating our 50th. It was so hard. But I realized, oh my gosh, everyone else is here with someone. And they weren't all romantic couples, but they were there with like a girls' trip or, like someone. They were, or friends, or they had. And I realized, oh my word, it's happened. I've achieved my final form. I'm Miss Marple. I'm finally Miss Marple, who I've loved forever. I'm like, I am now the outsider looking in. I am now the person paying attention to everyone else. And, I'm extrapolating a little. I am now the person, like, if there were a murder here, I am the only person who could solve it. Because all of you have been paying attention to your other people, and I have been paying attention to you. And so that was the moment the trip kind of turned around for me. I was like, what if I write a murder mystery and the woman is divorced and she solves the murder because she's the one who's been paying attention to everything else? And it was so fun. Like, I had the best time writing this book. It is not, some of the feelings are real. I've been alone watching people at a restaurant, missing my kids, feeling sad, but I unfortunately have not solved a murder yet. And so that was what I started out with was, okay, this is getting really fun. Okay, I'm going to be like, this is the Miss Marple character. And I started writing it. And a crazy thing happens, and I'm probably going to get teary because there are friends in the audience, plus it's BYU, so you'll feel like I don't have a testimony if I don't cry at some point during this talk. Even if I'm not talking about, the gospel. But I realized, like, the thing that she got out of this novel and that she realized she'd had all along was her friends. And that was so fun to write. That was so fun to get back to her, was even when you think everything else is gone, there are still people in your corner, and it made this novel just a total delight. So I'm going to read for you. She makes some friends there, and maybe they murdered people, maybe they didn't. We don't know until the end, and then you do know. But I'm going to read you a part kind of from, it's not the very beginning, but pretty close to the beginning, and then we'll do Q&A, where she's just arrived at the resort, and she's sitting for that first awful meal by herself, looking around. And her name is Ellery. I think that's all you need to know. Oh, and her ex-husband's name is Luke. It seemed like everywhere Ellery looked, every life she saw cut her to the quick. Everyone had a person. Everyone else's lives were going so well. It wasn't that she wanted their lives. She wanted her own life back. She had known, of course, that there were problems in her marriage. Luke had definitely been in the throes of a midlife crisis for the past few years. But she was so sure it would pass. She thought they'd weather it together the way they had everything else. I should give a disclaimer here, this character is also fictional. Grad school, babies, toddlers, job changes, moves, illness, teenagers. Sometimes he was wonderful. Other times he said things that broke her heart. I shouldn't have gotten married so young. I was so busy doing what everyone expected of me that I didn't think about whether it was what I wanted to do. I shouldn't have gone straight to grad school. I should have tried to be a musician instead. I never had time to find myself. I didn't get to see what was out there. They were laughable, the things he said. They were the things the crappy ex-husband says in the movie before the heroine goes home to her small town to heal and re-meets her super hot high school boyfriend, who is now a veterinarian raising his deceased sister's precocious daughter. But she'd always thought that she and Luke would make it. They were both good people. They had had great times, so many of them small and big. They had raised each other up, cheered one another on, held each other when they cried. They knew what the other looked like when they were sleeping, kissing, sobbing, brushing their teeth, seeing their children for the first time. The kids. Ellery stood. Her napkin fell from her lap to the ground, and she didn't bother to retrieve it. She turned almost blindly and began walking back the way she'd come. A waiter moved to the side to let her pass. Her sandaled heels made snick-snack, clip-clop sounds on the stone of the patio as she made her way between the tables. Did the others glancing up at her know it too? How nothing and no one was ever as it seemed? Not even this beautiful place, not even their beautiful lives. Luke had told her he was done in May, 2 weeks before school ended. They were sitting at the kitchen table after the kids were in bed. Kate, their oldest, had a cello recital coming up. Ethan, their son, had just finished his freshman year in high school. Maddie, the youngest, had a new best friend who they both found hilarious. Those were the things she thought they would talk about. I'm not happy, Luke said instead. I don't like anything about my life. He was holding her hand. He had said things like this before. At first, it didn't register that this time he was serious, that he wasn't blowing off steam. She looked back at the counter where she'd packed the kids' lunches for the next day, still scattered with paper bags and jammy knives and apple cores, at the shoes on the floor, the dollops of socks they hadn't picked up when they'd peeled them off after school, the dishes in the sink. Earlier that evening, she'd thought, how is it possible to work literally every minute of this day and have nothing to show for it? How little she had known. She'd had everything to show for it. And now it was all being taken away. So that's the beginning. I think as I was writing that passage, that part is pretty true to life, that feeling, that looking around and what I saw. But I had a really strong callback. This is the peril of being an English major and English teacher. I thought, I am writing that feels like something I've read. And that's terrifying because you're like, am I doing accidental plagiarism right now? Not, like actual plagiarism, but it is still, but unintentional. And I realized, no, but I am doing a callback to Our Town. Has anyone read that play? And I realized, it took me a few months reading that passage and being like, this is just feeling not familiar, but like I'm definitely deriving inspiration from something subconsciously. And there's that great part at the end of Our Town that's also really heartbreaking, where she's like, oh world, no one knows how beautiful you are. Some of you remember this? So the character is dead. I'm not spoilering anything. You know that pretty soon. Also, it's been around for decades, so you've had a chance. So she comes back just for a little bit to kind of watch her town and observe, and she has that moment where she realizes, my word, the world is so gorgeous. And Amy Krauss Rosenthal, another author I really love, in her novel Encyclopedia of an Ordinary Life, riffs on that a little bit too, where she says, what if you had been dead and you got to come back for one day? And she talks about how you would look at, there's the cracks on my steps. There's, the dead plant. I love all these things that you took for granted. You just love, 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 and would love to see again. And so that's kind of the thing I'm looking for, or the feeling I'm going for in this book. I'm skipping these slides because I want to leave more time for questions. It's funny, it's a murder mystery. It is funny, I think, I promise. And so, and not just sad, but like that feeling of, oh my word, the world is so beautiful. And when you're in Big Sur, you can't help but notice that constantly, all the time. But then also it could all disappear so quickly. But that's what makes it precious too. So that was kind of the feeling I was going for in the book. And now we have a little under 10 minutes for Q&A. So love to hear what you guys have to ask. like I said, I did used to teach high school. I am from Cedar City, so I say things like did used to. And I am not fazed by your silence. I will just stand here and look at you and feel like totally fine, because high schoolers did that all the time. But I'd love to hear what you'd like to ask if there's anything. Yes, right here. Yeah. That's a great question. She asked how, dialogue is tricky. How do you write dialogue? She finds herself second guessing herself. I do that too. Honestly, I heard a quote once that said, "Dialogue is your workhorse, use it." And that kind of changed things for me, because all of the things I was doing in plot could be done in dialogue, quicker, more authentically, and with voice. And that takes a while to get right. And it takes a while to know your characters. So I think be really patient with yourself. You might not nail dialogue until you've written your full first draft. And I actually, we have a friend, Andy and I, who talks about draft 0. Like, just take the pressure off yourself to write draft 1. It's just draft 0. It's the author telling the story to themselves, and you've probably heard that before. But it is that for me, and I don't know what the characters will say until I know them, and I don't know the characters till I've written draft 0. So it's not the most efficient writing process, certainly, but cut yourself a lot of slack. Put them in different situations. Put them in situations that you may not use in the book and just have them talk to each other. I have done that before, where I'm like, okay, they're on a cruise and everyone gets dysentery. Like, what would they say about that, right? There's some Oregon Trail like deeply embedded in me as well. And so what would they say about that? So even if you don't use that situation, you now know them better and you know them talking to each other a little bit better. If that makes sense. So, yes. That's a great question, too. I have a couple of concrete tips I learned in graduate school that I will share with you, so you don't have to spend $40,000. And they are, so actually, I never know if it's going to be vignette or not until I'm writing the book. Like, I'm not like, and now a vignette. Like, it just is sort of natural. That's the pacing. But I did get 2 tips in grad school that I have thought a lot about since we were workshopping. And one of the other authors in workshop was like, Allie, don't take this the wrong way, but you show a lot of people like going to the place. You can just show them in the place. And I realized, oh my word, I do that all the time. Like, and now we're going, like, I was always showing people like in transit. I don't know why. And so that's something I've learned is like, I don't always have to show them getting there. They can just be there, which I think does feel a little bit more vignette-y. And then another thing I learned was if you're really struggling with the ending of your chapter, and this isn't always the case, it may not even be the case half the time, but it is the case often enough that I found it super helpful. You have overwritten. Like your chapter actually ended a little bit further on the page, and you're trying to bring it around to something that you've already brought it around to. I think about that one all the time. So, yes. That's a great question. Sorry, did I cut you off there? Yeah. So I always was a writer before I could even write, which I think means I was a storyteller, which I think all of us are. It's just the medium that our stories take. So even before I had like the ability to write, I would tell my babysitter, basically, you're taking dictation today. Like, I have this story, can you write it down? And then once I learned to write, I could do that for myself. So I always had that part of me that really, really wanted to do it. But I had watched my mom, who's a beautiful artist, and my parents are great, and they're also super practical. And she was like, you can do what you love, but you also have to feed yourself. And so she did, and she's a wonderful teacher. She's won a lot of awards for that as well. So I thought, I will be a teacher, and then I can teach writing, and I can still read, and that will be so fun. But I loved teaching so much that honestly, I kind of forgot about writing. Like, I liked it, I knew I loved it, but I loved teaching. And I coached cross country, which I also loved. And I found that really fulfilling. But then when I quit to live in the sorority and stay at home with my first baby, I realized, oh, I think I do want to tell stories. Like, I'm no longer scratching that itch of, like, I think it's just being in stories, whether it's, like, when you're with kids and students, it's so interesting and it's so engaging. And I thought, maybe I'll try to write a story for my students. Not really, but I'll try to write a young adult novel. And that got rejected roundly by many agents. And eventually it was published by Deseret Book. I wrote 5 books for Deseret Book before I broke into the national market. And that was so helpful too, because Deseret Book, there was an editor there who saw some promise in me, and she was the one who kind of let me learn how to write with her. So that's a long roundabout way of saying it felt amazing to finally have a book that was finished, to see it all the way through to the end. It also felt like I could have done other things and been happy too, which is a weird thing. You know, like, I think I was finding a lot of fulfillment in some other stuff prior to that, but I loved it. And I've definitely looked back and thought, oh, would I still do this, knowing the way things would turn out with, like, personal things and life. But I think I would have, you can always second guess yourself, but I'm glad I found the way to tell stories that feels right to me. I think that's so important for everyone to find. I think people tell stories, I'm a big sports fan, through athletics. I think they tell them through music. I think they tell them through being a preschool teacher, baking. Like, I think there's so many things, and this is the format that it's taken for me, and I am deeply grateful right now. Like, my work brings me so much joy right now, writing these picture books and things. So thank you for asking that question. I don't know that I answered it properly, but right here. I do have a few favorite poems. There's the poem I used in the Match series by Dylan Thomas is probably my favorite. Do Not Go Gentle. I like that because it hit me. It's the Do Not Go Gentle into That Good Night by Dylan Thomas. That just hit me like a bolt of lightning the first time I read it. And I was like, I do not totally understand this poem, but I know how it makes me feel. And I love it so much also because teaching it had the same response. Even if kids didn't totally get the poem, they got the feeling. I love that poem. I did once get an email from a reader who was like, I'm so excited, I'm going to have your poem, Do Not Go Gentle, tattooed. And I was like, no, I paid a lot of money for the rights to properly attribute, because I am an English teacher, that poem throughout the novels. But we did let her know in time before she got it tattooed that it should be attributed to Dylan Thomas, not Ali Condie. That would have been my greatest nightmares. But I do really love it, and I think that shows people want to put it on their body, right? It's a great poem. I know we're probably just about at time. Do we want to?
If folks have, we want to make sure people can go. If folks have questions, Ali will be here signing books. You can come by and talk to her.
Yeah.
Let's give her a hand.
Thanks, you guys.